Hey, my name is Denomme, and I'm a missionary to Quebec. And this is my story. I grew up in St. Catharines, Ontario, and just graduated from Brock University in 2009. For my second year of university, I helped to start Campus for Christ on my campus. My final year, I led the ministry. Over the course of those 3 years, it was incredible to see it grow from five of us praying for God to work on the campus to a vibrant movement with over 60 students involved. But at our Campus for Christ winter conference last year, God showed me I need to leave. Did I want to? Absolutely not. But through prayer, He gave me an illustration and said I was like Abraham, and the ministry at Brock was my Isaac. If you don't know the story, essentially God promises Abraham a son, and in his old age, Abraham became a father. Just like Abraham loved his son Isaac, I loved the ministry of Brock, and like Abraham, God was calling me to sacrifice it. I was at a point of decision, a crossroads, so I asked God for confirmation. The next day at the conference, I came into a session late, and what was the first passage we looked at? Genesis 12:1. That passage is God's call to Abraham to leave his land and to go to a land that God would show him. So first, God tells me I need to be like Abraham and sacrifice the thing that was most precious to me. And next, He's confirming that like Abraham, I was called to leave and go somewhere God would show me. So then my question was where? God answered that too. The next day, a staff member spoke of the need for missionaries in Quebec and challenged anyone who had done French in high school or university to consider coming to Quebec for a year. I really felt that it was a stewardship issue. There was a need in Quebec, and I had some French background, so I would be obedient and go. As I raised support last summer, I was blown away by God's faithfulness. But at the end of August, I was still thousands of dollars short and didn't anticipate being able to arrive in Quebec in less than a month. God had other plans, as He often does, and apparently wanted me in Quebec ASAP. He brought in the remaining $7,000 in 8 days so that I was able to report on campus for the first week of September. But as I soon found out, God had a year of testing in store. Within a few weeks, I became bitter at God for sending me to this place where life and ministry seemed so difficult. I thought I was good at training students for ministry, but in the first month, it felt like I was getting nowhere. It also seemed like I was being robbed of my abilities. All of my skills were completely hindered by the language barrier. On top of that, I had come from a campus where the student movement was exploding and ministry was really taking off. When I arrived at Sherbrooke, we were essentially starting from scratch. By the end of the first few months, I was still wondering why God would send me somewhere I didn't really want to go, to work in a language I didn't really want to learn, just to face ministry challenges that I felt were over my head. Why? Why, God? But now, as I look back on the past year of ministry, I see God's hand in it all. God has been chipping away at my pride, and little by little, bring me to a point where I realize my inadequacy. All the challenges have simply been God's way of refining me, and Quebec is an ideal place for that. But remember I started the video by saying this is my story? You know, God has really been showing me this past year that my story doesn't really matter at all. The question is, am I playing a part in His story? History is an epic love story of God calling out for mankind to return to Him. His chosen people, the Israelites, time and time again turned away from God, but He kept beckoning them to return to Him. Christ then came so that our relationship with God could be restored. He called for people to turn from their attitude of rebellion against God and return to a God of love. In Matthew 28:18-20, Christ then commissioned His disciples to continue His work of reconciliation, calling individuals of all nations to return to Him. I'm beginning to see that this is the only story that matters. I want to be part of this story. Like the people of Israel, the Quebecois people have turned from the Lord. On the campus, day after day, I see students seeking after their own form of spirituality. A spirituality that refuses to accept any absolute truth. But I believe God is sending a generation of young missionaries like myself to Quebec. He's raising up laborers both from Quebec, from around Canada, and from around the world, because this is a mission field that is so untouched by the gospel. With only 0.5% even claiming to follow Christ, the need is great. Here's how two Quebecois guys in our ministry describe the mission field in Quebec.
They reject religion, especially because of the religious history in Quebec in the 1800s with the Catholic Church. It really put an oppression on Quebec people and especially deceived them. For people here in Quebec, religion equals control and God equals bad things. People think that God will not allow them to do some things, that God is always behind you, ready to punish you, and even that God doesn't exist and just live your life and live free. But it's the complete opposite, and that's why we need the missionaries here to bring a new wind, a fresh new way of bringing the gospel, different than people that have lived in that atmosphere. It's sure here in Quebec we have Christians that are on fire for God, but we need people from other provinces also.
Okay, the mission field in Quebec, I think I can testify as being a Quebecois that the mission field in Quebec is really hard because there's a lot of people who don't want to hear the gospel and they don't want to hear about Jesus, about God, but they do want to hear about spiritual things, and I think it's a way that God is opening hearts.
Now what about your part? Would you consider coming? Maybe like me, God is calling you to leave your comfort zone and come to Quebec. Or maybe He's not calling you to Quebec. But could I ask you to consider partnering with me? After a year in this province, I'm left overwhelmed by the great need, both in Quebec and more specifically on the campus I'm working on. I don't know what the coming years will bring, but I'm confident that this is where God wants me. Hey, my name is Denomme, and I'm a missionary to Quebec. This is His story.
Look, this is Daniel here.
Yes,
Hi.
Hey. Okay, we've got to do a... Okay, so Daniel here, and
Daniel here.
we'd just like to say that if you feel called to Quebec, come to Quebec.
Yeah. On a besoin de personnes.
Besoin de personnes ici.
Ouais.
Vraiment.
So if you're called for doing any missionary trip, you should really consider Quebec because I think it's a land where there's a lot of need, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of need.
Yeah.
Just like this guy.
I knew you would say that. I knew you would say it.
So, anyway, yeah. Over and out.